The flamethrower operator feels the weight of 60 pounds strapped to his back as he approaches the cave mouth. His hands shake, not from fear of dying, but from what waits inside. Behind the black entrance carved into Okinawa's coral limestone, Japanese soldiers have transformed nature into a fortress. The American sergeant beside him has done this 17 times today. 17 caves, 17 times crawling toward darkness while machine gun fire seeks his silhouette. Now, at dusk on April 12, 1945, he crouches at number 18. Inside, voices echo in Japanese. Shuffling feet, the metallic click of weapons being chambered. The sergeant knows what every Marine knows by now. There are no easy caves. Only caves that kill you fast and caves that kill you slow. He lights the igniter, feels the pilot flame catch, and whispers a prayer his mother taught him in Kansas. Then the real horror begins, because what they'll find in these caves over the coming weeks will redefine warfare itself and haunt every survivor until their last breath. If you want to understand how modern underground warfare evolved, how combat engineers became the most crucial specialists in the Pacific, and why Okinawa remains studied in every military academy worldwide, subscribe now. You'll want to see what's coming. Okinawa, April 1st through June 22nd. 1945, the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War, 450 miles from mainland Japan, 60 miles long, between 2 and 18 miles wide, the strategic prize that would serve as the launching point for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan itself. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima commanded the Japanese 32nd Army, 100,000 soldiers and local conscripts, dug into the island's southern highlands. Facing him, the United States 10th Army under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr., bringing 183,000 troops in the initial landings. But numbers meant nothing here. Okinawa wasn't one with soldiers. It was one with engineers, explosives, and a brutal education in subterranean warfare that nobody had prepared for. The island's geology, soft coral limestone riddled with natural caves, steep ridges, and deep ravines, had been turned into the most sophisticated defensive network the Japanese ever constructed. This wasn't Iwo Jima. This wasn't Peleliu. This was something entirely new, and it would cost both sides everything. The Japanese had learned from every previous defeat. 2 years of watching Marines storm islands had taught Imperial General Headquarters a terrible lesson. Beach defense fails. Banzai charges fail. Surface fortifications fail. So Ushijima's chief engineer, Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, designed something different. He abandoned the coastline entirely. Instead, he went underground. His soldiers spent 8 months before the invasion hand-carving over 400 major cave complexes and thousands of smaller positions into Okinawa's hills. These weren't simple foxholes. The caves held artillery pieces that could roll forward on tracks, fire, and retreat into darkness before counter-battery fire arrived. They contained hospitals, command posts, ammunition depots, and living quarters connected by tunnels that allowed defenders to move between positions without ever exposing themselves to American artillery or airstrikes. The entrances were camouflaged, angled to prevent direct fire, and covered by interlocking fields of machine gun fire from adjacent caves. Ushijima's doctrine was simple: let the Americans land. Let them move inland, then bleed them in a war of attrition so costly that the United States government would negotiate peace rather than invade the home islands. Every cave was a killing position, every ridge was a fortress, and every Marine would have to dig them out one by one. The terrain itself conspired against the Americans. Okinawa's southern highlands consisted of steep escarpments with names that became infamous: Kakazu Ridge, the Pinnacle, Sugarloaf Hill, the Shuri Line, Kunishi Ridge. Between them, muddy ravines turned into impassable swamps when the spring rains came in May. Tanks bogged down. Supply trucks couldn't reach forward positions, and the caves dotted every hillside like eyes watching the Americans struggle. Temperature inside the caves stayed cool, even as soldiers outside baked under the subtropical sun. Humidity made everything rust, rot, and stick. Rain turned the battlefield into a bog where men drowned in shell craters. The Japanese knew this landscape intimately. They'd mapped every cave, every tunnel, every approach. American intelligence had aerial photographs showing natural caves, but they had no idea how extensively those caves had been fortified, connected, and turned into interlocking strongpoints. The Marines and Army infantry came ashore expecting a difficult fight. What they got was a descent into hell. For the first 2 weeks, American forces pushed inland with relatively light resistance, reaching Okinawa's narrow waist and dividing the island. Then, on April 9th, they hit the Kakazu Ridge, and the real war began. The 96th Infantry Division attacked the ridge and was torn apart. Japanese artillery hidden in caves rained shells on advancing troops. Machine gun fire came from positions that seemed impossible to locate until it was too late. When American artillery saturated the hillside, the Japanese simply withdrew deeper into their caves, waited for the barrage to lift, and then emerged to slaughter the infantry assault. Flamethrowers, the weapon that had cracked Japanese pillboxes on previous islands, couldn't reach deep enough into these caves. The entrance would be cleared, engineers would move forward to demolish it, and fire would erupt from a connected tunnel 30 yards away. Soldiers died in front of caves they thought were empty. The casualty reports climbed. 20 killed, 40 wounded, 60 killed, 80 wounded. Battalions that landed at full strength were combat ineffective within days. And the Japanese adapted faster than American tactics could evolve. They learned to time their counterattacks for dusk when American air support couldn't see. They learned to wait until sappers were placing demolition charges, then ambush them. They learned that the caves themselves were weapons more powerful than any gun. The Marine Corps and Army had flamethrower teams, demolition specialists, and combat engineers, but they'd never faced anything like this. Previous Pacific campaigns taught them to suppress bunkers with direct fire, approach from the flanks, and use satchel charges or napalm. But Okinawa's caves had multiple entrances, connecting tunnels, and depths that made conventional explosives useless. 100 pounds of TNT might collapse an entrance, but the defenders would simply dig out another exit or fire from a position behind the blast. The Americans tried pumping gasoline into caves and igniting it, but ventilation shafts and tunnel bends protected the Japanese. They tried using Bangalore torpedoes to reach deeper, but the explosions dissipated in the cave's volume. They tried systematic suppression with artillery and airstrikes, but the rock absorbed everything. Marines began calling it the Cave War, and it was killing them faster than any previous battle. Psychological toll was worse than the physical casualties. Soldiers knew that approaching a cave meant probable death. They knew that even if they survived today's assault, tomorrow held another ridge, another 50 caves, another 100 Japanese soldiers who would never surrender. Exhaustion, fear, and horror became the constants. Men stopped sleeping, they stopped eating, they stopped believing they'd live through the next day.
Then, someone remembered Lieutenant Colonel Robert Dunlap and his 713th Tank Battalion's experiments with flamethrower tanks. The Marines had been developing vehicle-mounted flamethrowers since 1943, but Okinawa was where they became essential. The M4 Sherman tank, modified with a Navy-designed Mark I flamethrower replacing the bow machine gun, could deliver napalm-thickened flame 200 feet into cave mouths. More importantly, it could withstand the return fire that killed infantry flamethrower teams. The first successful deployment came at Kakazu West on April 19th, when a platoon of flame tanks moved forward under covering artillery fire, positioned themselves directly in front of cave entrances, and sent streams of burning fuel deep into the coral limestone. The temperature inside the caves became unsurvivable. Oxygen burned away. Soldiers who tried to flee deeper or asphyxiated by smoke. The caves became ovens. But the real innovation came from combat engineers of the 1st Marine Division and Army 96th Division, who developed a combined arms technique: suppress the cave entrance with tank and machine gun fire, move flame tanks forward to pump fire inside, then immediately follow with demolition teams carrying shaped charges specifically designed for cave warfare. These weren't standard explosives. Engineers had learned to use 40-gallon drums filled with diesel fuel, napalm, and white phosphorus, rolled into cave mouths after the initial flamethrower assault, then detonated with a delayed fuse. The explosion consumed remaining oxygen, collapsed supporting cave structures, and sealed entrances with rubble. It was horrific, it was effective, and it became standard doctrine. The engineers also developed a methodical clearing protocol. Every cave had to be mapped, approached from multiple angles to identify secondary entrances, and cleared in coordination with infantry support. A typical cave reduction required 6 to 8 hours of preparation. First, reconnaissance teams would observe the cave for Japanese activity, noting when defenders fired, how many positions were active, and where tunnels might connect. Then artillery would saturate the area to suppress adjacent caves that could provide covering fire. Next, Sherman tanks would advance to within 50 yards, protected by infantry screening for anti-tank mines and suicide attackers with magnetic charges. The flame tanks would maneuver to firing position, while infantry suppressed the entrance with rifle and machine gun fire. The tank would discharge its flame fuel, approximately 70 gallons in a sustained burst lasting 8 to 10 seconds. If the cave was shallow, this was enough. If not, demolition teams carrying the drum charges would rush forward under covering smoke and roll the drums inside. They had 60 seconds to place the charge, arm the fuse, and retreat before detonation. If a tunnel allowed Japanese soldiers to escape and counterattack, the whole process began again. This happened cave after cave, ridge after ridge, for 79 days. The cost was extraordinary. The 713th Tank Battalion lost 50% of its flame tanks to mechanical failure, enemy fire, and accidents where the volatile fuel tanks ignited from battle damage. Infantry supporting cave assaults suffered casualty rates approaching 60% in some companies. But the technique worked. Slowly, methodically, the Americans pushed south. The Japanese understood what was happening. Ushijima's headquarters intercepted reports describing the flame tank tactics. He ordered his troops to target the flame tank specifically, using 47mm anti-tank guns hidden in cave positions. Multiple flame tanks were destroyed when armor-piercing rounds punctured the fuel tanks, creating fireballs that consumed the crew. American engineers adapted by using regular Sherman tanks as decoy, drawing anti-tank fire so spotters could locate the guns for counter-battery fire. Then the real flame tanks would attack. The tactical evolution happened in days, sometimes hours. Every battle taught lessons written in blood. The heaviest cave fighting came at the Shuri Line in May 1945, where the ancient Shuri Castle and surrounding ridges formed the heart of Japanese defenses. Here, the caves weren't just defensive positions, they were the entire infrastructure of Ushijima's army. Underground, the Japanese had built a headquarters complex with electric lighting, ventilation, multiple levels, and exits scattered across half a mile. Above ground, torrential rains turned the battlefield into a mud swamp. Tanks couldn't maneuver, infantry assaults bogged down, and the caves poured fire on anyone who approached. The 1st Marine Division took 14 days to advance 400 yards. The 96th Infantry Division lost 1,000 men, capturing a single ridge called the Needle. The fighting reached levels of intensity that veterans of European combat found incomprehensible. This wasn't lines of soldiers attacking defended positions. This was close combat measured in yards, where flamethrowers, grenades, and bayonets decided who lived. Engineers would seal a cave, move forward 50 yards, and discover another entrance was active. They'd fight back to the first cave, find the Japanese had dug out overnight, and start over. There was no front line. There was no rear area. There were only caves and the men trying to clear them. Then, on May 21st, as the spring rains temporarily cleared, American forces launched a coordinated assault on the Shuri Line, using every lesson learned. 200 flame tanks and conventional Shermans advanced simultaneously across a 3-mile front. Behind them, engineers with prepared drum charges and satchel packs moved in teams of 4. Infantry suppressed cave entrances with white phosphorus grenades that marked targets for the tankers. Artillery walked a barrage 200 yards ahead of the advance, shifting fire as units moved forward. For the first time, the Americans overwhelmed the cave defenses by attacking faster than the Japanese could react. Dozens of caves were cleared in hours instead of days. The Shuri Line began to collapse. Ushijima withdrew his remaining forces south to the Kiun Peninsula for a final stand, abandoning the cave complexes he'd spent months preparing. But the Marines and Army soldiers pushing into the captured caves discovered something that intelligence had never anticipated: the extent of the Japanese commitment to death over surrender. Inside the Shuri cave complex, engineers found hospital wards where wounded soldiers had been left behind, many with self-inflicted gunshot wounds rather than face capture. They found supply depots still stocked with ammunition, food, and medicine that the Japanese hadn't destroyed, suggesting the withdrawal was more chaotic than Japanese reports later claimed. They found rooms serving as morgues where bodies were arranged with personal effects carefully preserved, and they found evidence of civilian casualties: Okinawan families who'd taken shelter in the caves and died in the American assaults. The engineers had no way to distinguish military defenders from civilian refugees in the darkness. The flamethrowers and drum charges killed indiscriminately. This moral weight settled on the survivors. They'd done their job. They'd broken the Japanese defenses, but what they found in the caves afterward, the burned bodies, the suffocated children, the desperate last messages written on cave walls, that stayed with them forever. Nobody celebrated. There was only exhaustion and horror. The final cave fighting came at Kunishi Ridge and the Kiun Peninsula in June. Here, Ushijima's remaining forces made their last stand in caves that overlooked the southern coast. The Americans brought every weapon: napalm airstrikes, naval gunfire, artillery saturation, flame tanks, and massed infantry assaults. The Japanese had nowhere to withdraw. They fought until the caves became tombs. On June 18th, General Buckner was killed by Japanese artillery while observing the front lines, the highest-ranking American officer killed by enemy fire during the war. 3 days later, Ushijima committed ritual suicide in his final cave headquarters rather than surrender. The organized defense collapsed, but cave clearing continued for another week as isolated groups of soldiers fought to the death. Marines entered caves and found Japanese soldiers who'd been sealed inside for days without food or water, still clutching weapons, waiting to kill one more American before they died. The engineers sealed over 200 major caves in those final days, many with live defenders still inside, because there was no way to extract them and no willingness to surrender. The concrete and rubble entombed them. Some were still screaming as the final charges detonated. When the battle officially ended on June 22, 1945, the United States had suffered 49,151 casualties, including 12,520 killed or missing. The Japanese lost approximately 110,000 soldiers killed, with only 7,400 taken prisoner, an unprecedented ratio that revealed the depth of their suicide defense doctrine. Okinawan civilian deaths exceeded 100,000, many killed in the cave fighting or forced into group suicides by Japanese commanders. The island was devastated, and what American engineers had learned would reshape combat doctrine for every future conflict. The cave warfare techniques developed on Okinawa were immediately classified and studied. Manuals were written. Training programs were established. The flamethrower tank became standard equipment in every Marine tank battalion. The demolition protocols became required training for all combat engineers. And the psychological screening for cave-clearing specialists was codified, because commanders recognized that this type of fighting destroyed men faster than any previous combat role. The caves themselves became artifacts. After the battle, American military historians entered the major complexes and documented everything: the construction techniques, the defensive layouts, the living conditions, the supply systems. They found that Japanese engineers had achieved remarkable sophistication in just 8 months: ventilation systems using bamboo pipes, drainage to prevent flooding, blast walls to compartmentalize tunnels, even lighting powered by generators. The caves at Shuri were studied by engineers who would later design American underground command bunkers during the Cold War. The defensive doctrine was analyzed by strategists planning for potential combat in Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, where cave and tunnel networks would again become critical terrain. Okinawa proved that underground warfare required specialized training, equipment, and tactics that standard infantry couldn't execute. It proved that technology, flamethrowers, explosives, and armored vehicles could overcome prepared defenses if properly employed. And it proved that the human cost of reducing fortified positions was so extreme that future wars would prioritize air power, precision weapons, and siege tactics over frontal assault. But the lesson that mattered most never made it into official manuals. Some Ouijis hollow out the winners. The combat engineers and infantrymen who cleared those caves came home changed. They'd killed at close range, repeatedly, for weeks. They'd burned people alive because it was tactically necessary. They'd heard the screaming, smelt the burning flesh, and seen what happens when fuel-air explosives detonate in confined spaces. Many developed what would now be diagnosed as severe PTSD, nightmares of being trapped underground, phobias of enclosed spaces, intrusive memories triggered by the smell of smoke or diesel fuel. The Veterans Administration recorded higher suicide rates among Okinawa cave-clearing specialists than almost any other combat role from World War II. They didn't talk about it. In 1945, soldiers were expected to come home, be grateful they survived, and move on. But the caves followed them. One marine flamethrower operator, interviewed in 1998, said he still heard the voices from the caves every night. He was 74 years old. The battle had ended 53 years earlier. The war moved on. The men never did. Today, many of Okinawa's caves remain sealed, concrete monuments to what happened there. Some have been opened as memorial sites where tourists walk through sanitized, lit tunnels and read plaques describing the strategic significance. But the real caves, the ones where the worst fighting occurred, stay closed. The Japanese government hasn't excavated them. The remains inside are considered war graves. Engineers who return to Okinawa as old men can point to hillsides and say, "I sealed that one. I killed everyone inside." That knowledge doesn't fade. There is no tactical innovation, no strategic victory, no technical achievement that erases the moral weight of what those caves demanded from the young men who cleared them. War found a new depth on Okinawa, and the cost was measured not just in casualties reported, but in the lifelong burden carried by survivors who did what was necessary and never forgave themselves for succeeding.